This is Vanessa Vokey, and she is a self-described TERF, which is an acronym for Trans-Exclusionary Radical Feminist. Or in other words, she's a type of feminist who doesn't view trans women as any kind of actual women, but rather as men pretending to be women.
Yay! I'm so proud of her. I'm so happy for her. Just kidding. I don't give a fuck.
This is Samantha Lux. She is a trans woman that Vanessa Vokey has harassed on multiple occasions, using he/him pronouns to describe her and calling her a man. And in one particularly bizarre video, Vanessa had this to say to Sam.
There is no such thing as a transgender woman. There is no such thing as a woman who is not female. There's no such thing as a male woman. There's no such thing as transitioning your sex. There's no such thing as a sex change. There's no such thing as gender affirmation surgery. All of these are cult lingo, and it's all meant to disguise the truth and to indoctrinate you into this belief system slowly and surely to get you to put down your boundaries and get you to accept perverted male fetishists getting off on threatening women and exposing themselves in women's spaces. That's what you're supporting by obfuscating from the truth, which is that this whole movement exists as a way for men to get away with sex crimes.
Okay, now that we've heard from a TERF, let's click on this YouTube video and hear from neuroscientist Jeanette Norden.
Well, human sexuality and how it's expressed in particular cultures is a very, very complicated subject. Biologists, however, generally break it down into various categories, and they're obviously interrelated in most individuals, but these categories would include genotypic sex. So genotypic sex is determined by the inheritance of either two X's or an X and a Y chromosome. The next type of category of sex that biologists generally make is phenotypic sex. And this is determined by the development of internal and external genitalia. Neuroscience has in fact found another category. It's revealed another category of sex called brain sex. And brain sex means that the actual structural and thus likely to be functional differences in the way brains are organized in male and female may in fact relate to differences in how males and females relate to their environment and also gender identification. The differentiation into two forms, so we say a male and a female form, is referred to as sexual dimorphism of the brain. Now, what happens in the little developing male fetus who doesn't produce enough testosterone? And this does happen. If those little gonads don't produce enough testosterone, so there isn't enough to get into the brain and thereby be converted within certain groups of neurons into estradiol, that male will develop a female brain. In females, in female fetuses, if for some reason the mother is producing a high level of androgens in her bloodstream, if the mother is exposed to certain kinds of steroids, if the mother takes particular drugs like barbiturates during pregnancy, or we now know if the mother is exposed to high levels of pesticides, all of these things will masculinize female brains. So that means that a female fetus whose mother is exposed to certain things, that fetus will be exposed to androgen that will in fact masculinize her brain. As adults, they will behave consistent with their brain sex. This is what guides their behavior, so that's what's most important. Now, it also tells us something else, and I think that this is very important to understand. Both male and female genotypes and phenotypes are compatible with either brain sex type. So you could be a genetically male or female person and have a brain of the opposite sex and is perfectly compatible with it. We are born with a brain that is either male or female. This cannot be altered by experience. It's due to the hormonal environment that existed or did not exist during female development or fetal development. So finally, what is the evidence that sexual dimorphism of the brain influences human behavior, such as the choice of a sexual partner as an adult? And this is something, a lot of people are very interested in. Very famous neuroscientist was one of the individuals who looked in the homosexual male brain and the heterosexual male brain in one of these areas in the hypothalamus. And indeed, it was dimorphic between those two groups. And that in homosexual males, that nucleus was organized more like the female brain. We're not really sure what this nucleus does in humans, though, so it's very hard for us to tell whether or not, or how that plays out in the expression of sexual behavior. So to do that, I think a better example is to look at actual clinical disorders in which the genotype and phenotype and the brain sex are not the same.
Final realm of neurobiology, rather than issues of gay versus straight, what is the neurobiology of transsexuality? Another region of the brain that shows a sex difference in its average size. Don't even worry about the name of this. It's called the bed nucleus of the striae terminalis. It's where the amygdala begins to send its projection into the hypothalamus. Another one to those gender differences. There's one type of neuron in there with a certain type of neurotransmitter where very, very reliably it is about twice the size in males than in females. Sufficiently so that even in human brains you could pretty confidently determine the sex of somebody by seeing the number of these neurons. You'll see I'm not even saying the name of the neurotransmitter. It's irrelevant. It's just another one of those differences, a dimorphism in a region of the brain, a really, really reliable one. And this was a study done by some superb neuroanatomists looking at transsexuals. And what they showed was very interesting, which was very, very reliably and a very powerful effect what you would see in their large sample size of transsexuals' brains post-mortem was people would have this part of the brain the size not of their sex that they were born with, but rather of the sex they insisted they always actually were. Wow. Immediate questions one must ask. Okay, well maybe this is due to the fact that when people change gender, transsexual procedures, there's a whole lot of hormones involved, and maybe that's doing something to this part of the brain. Critical control that they had was this was looking both at transsexuals who had made gender changes and those who went to their deathbed saying, this is not the sex that I am, I got the wrong body, but never made the change. It wasn't a function of having actually gone through the transition and the endocrine manipulations with it. Another control they had, which was looking at men who would get a certain type of testicular cancer where they would have to be treated with certain feminizing hormones. In other words, very similar to some of the endocrine treatments of male to female transgendered individuals, and post-mortem, you didn't see the changes there. It has nothing to do with the hormones. It had to do with the person insisting from day one that they got the wrong body. And this was a landmark study, fabulously well done and controlled, and replicated once since then, showing that what transsexualism used to be thought of is that people who think that they're a different gender than they actually are. What this study suggests is what transsexualism is about is people who got the wrong gendered body. And these are people who are chromosomally of one sex. In terms of their gonads, they're of that sex. In terms of their hormones, they're of that sex. In terms of their genitalia and their secondary sexual characteristics, they're of that sex. But they're insisting that's not who I really am. This part of the brain agrees with them.
And full versions of both those educational videos will be linked down below in the description section as well as in my comment section.